Welcome to Voice for Infection Prevention, where we explore the latest developments, challenges, and insights in the field of infection prevention and control. With a passion for promoting patient safety and healthcare excellence, we're excited to bring you engaging discussions with experts, leaders, and innovators in the field. So whether you're a seasoned professional or just beginning your journey in infection prevention, welcome to the conversation. This is Voice for Infection Prevention.
Welcome back to Voice for Infection Prevention. Today I'm joined by Eileen Sherman, a longtime infection prevention leader whose career path offers such a thoughtful and encouraging perspective on growth in this field. Eileen's story is especially compelling because she entered infection prevention from a clinical microbiology background at the time when that path was far less common. Over the course of her career, she has served in roles ranging from solo infection preventionist to system-level leadership, building programs, leading teams, and helping shape how organizations think about the value of diverse backgrounds within infection prevention. In this conversation, Eileen shares how she found her way into the profession, what it was like learning the role as a non-nurse, and how she built confidence over time through preparation, partnership, and a willingness to keep learning. We also talk about leadership growth, what makes someone successful in infection prevention, and why the strongest teams often bring together different perspectives, experiences, and skill sets. If you've ever wondered how people grow into leadership in this field, how diverse backgrounds can strengthen an infection prevention program, or what makes this work such a meaningful long-term career, this conversation is one you won't want to miss. Let's dive in. So thank you for hopping on here. It's a lot of time, so I appreciate you spending some time with us this morning. But my first question I've got for you, and I start off every conversation this way, but I'm curious, most people that I've talked to have kind of fell into infection prevention or just kind of like happened. So I'm curious your story. How did you discover infection prevention as a practice?
Well, interestingly enough, I did feel like I fell right into it. I had no knowledge of what infection prevention or infection control at the time. It was primarily referred to as infection control. But I had no knowledge of that as even being a role or a profession until I was in graduate school. So I was in my sophomore year or junior year of college, and I discovered I loved microbiology. And so I thought, I really love this. I don't know, what my career path is, but I want to pursue this a little bit more. And so I went to graduate school for clinical microbiology. And it was during the course of that time when we were trying to find opportunities for me for an internship that I learned about an internship opportunity to work with the infection control department at the university where I was studying. And that just blew my mind. I spent 6 months, learning how to do surveillance and rounding with, hospital epidemiologist. And I just thought I had no idea this existed. And so I got super excited about that, and happened to be that right around the time that I was graduating from my master's program, that a position opened up for an infection control coordinator at a smaller children's hospital in Delaware. And I lived in Delaware, and I was like, this is wonderful. And so I thought I would just give it a go. And fortunately, because my background was not in nursing and there were mostly nurses doing the work, fortunately, the infectious disease physicians that worked at this organization felt that having a microbiology background worked just as well as having a nursing background. So they were forward thinking in that way, and gave me a chance. And I will never forget those two docs because they really did give me that chance and helped me kind of launch into learning about the role and the career.
Awesome. And yeah, so I got a couple questions that kind of popped up there. First, I want to hone into the internship because I hear from a lot of people in college that are just trying to get their foot in the door. How did the internship come about? I mean, was it just a job posting that you saw, or did somebody recommend? I've heard a lot of stories about people coming in to do a seminar and then you end up asking about it. Or how did the internship present itself? And then also, how difficult was it to land the internship being a non-nurse?
Mm-hmm. So it was actually a requirement of the program that I was in to do what they called a clerkship. And because we were studying clinical microbiology, many of the students would do a clerkship in the clinical laboratories or in research. But there was also this offering for you to do a clerkship in infection control. And so it was unpaid, but you could kind of at that point select what was your career path and where did you think you wanted to be focusing. And so for me, it was just an opportunity to learn more because, as I said, I really didn't know what this infection control role looked like. So fortunately for me, there weren't a lot of students raising their hand to say, I want to do that clerkship. So I raised my hand, and maybe one other student and we were able to take on that internship / clerkship. Yeah.
Okay. And and you mentioned the first role as an infection prevention coordinator, but in the internship, was there any hesitation at all with you being a non-nurse or non-clinical?
So the hospital epidemiologist did not seem to be hesitant at all. I think it was to our advantage that it was a partnership with the university,
Of course.
and she was very welcoming. Spent a lot of time just giving background. Um, there were all nurses in the department that I was shadowing or learning from as well. And there was occasionally like well, you're not a nurse, so I'm not sure if you're going to understand this. They would kind of preface things that they were teaching me in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I never felt like they were like, this is not the role for you, or it was more they were kind of pointing out you're going to need to learn the clinical side. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay. And how many hours a week was that internship?
Well, I did it for 6 months, but it was like, a few hours, a couple days a week, just spending
Gotcha.
time in the department.
Gotcha. Did you feel like it gave you a good concept of what an infection preventionist was, or did it take you getting into the full-time role to really kind of have a full understanding of what it was?
I had no idea what I was getting into, Jacob. I, Yes, I learned a lot about how to review a chart and try to identify infections based on NHSN definitions. I learned about rounding and looking for, certain things. I learned about how microbiology kind of intertwines with it and needing to have a basic understanding of micro in order to do the job. But it wasn't until I was actually in the role and I realized how much I needed to know and the breadth of what you need to know. That was kind of the way I described it to my friends. Like, after I I was working at nights in a clinical microbiology lab while I was doing my master's program. And when I was leaving my friends there to take this infection prevention job, they would call me and say, how's it going? And I'd say, well, I come in the office, I sit down, I have an anxiety attack, and then I get on with my day. Because that's exactly how it was. Like, I was just learning, and the phone would ring, and I'd be like, I know I'm not going to know how to answer any questions. Do I answer the phone? So I would put all these resources in front of me. Like, I worked in peds, so it'd be the Red Book, for infectious diseases. And then I could, go through that or whatever policies I thought would be most pertinent to the phone call. And so I'd have everything at my fingertips because I just was like, drinking from that fire hose,
Yeah. Yeah. So how long into that position did it take for you to feel comfortable and confident as like Okay. I'm an IP.
Mm-hmm.
People can count on me. Like, when did you, how long did it take for you to really feel good in the role?
Yeah. I, well, I would say I started to feel good in the role. I don't know, maybe a year in. Um, and even then I was still learning, like, how to interact with the clinical teams, what was important for me to be prepping myself for meetings or committee work. And so there was a lot of that, like still trying to develop my preparedness for whatever was going to come my way. But I think like the day-to-day tasks, I definitely, a year in, I was like, okay, I know what I'm going to do when I sit down each day. I know something's probably going to come up, but this is the basics of the job. The other thing that happened around that time, within the first year to like 2 years, was like, recognizing the resources of APIC. And I didn't even realize, that I didn't even think that I could reach out to other infection prevention, other infection control people and ask questions. Like it never really occurred to me until around that like year mark when I discovered I could join a local chapter of APIC and call people on the phone and ask them questions. And that's when I started to feel like, okay, I'm really supported here, because infection preventionists really support each other. There's no
Yeah.
competition there. It's like, you pick up the phone and you're all in the same situation and you share. So I think it was around that time, like about a year and a half in, where I was like, wow, there's this group, they're going to be
Yeah.
so helpful. So yeah.
No, that's great. And along the same lines, when did you decide it was time to get your certification?
Mm-hmm. I got my certification short of 3 years in the field. And that was, I think, just, based on what the CBIC recommended at the time, is that you were at least in the field for 2 years, 2 to 3, before sitting for the exam. So
Mm-hmm.
it was around the three year mark when I decided to sit for certification.
And at that point in your career, was it an easy test for you, or is it something that took a lot of effort to pass?
I passed it the first time. And I used whatever references were, recommended as other study tools at the time. The other thing we did a lot of back then was we studied together, and it was still, a test that you had to go and like actually, sit in a testing facility and take. But we did a lot of prep, like with other, chapter members. We would give each other study questions. There were study groups, so that helped
Wow.
a lot.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's really neat. So, okay, that first role, did you join a team of IPs or were you by yourself? Give me the scope and kind of what you were working with in that first position.
I was all by myself. I was what they call a oneer now, but at the time I was like, I'm alone. And the position had been vacant for some months. So I did have some support from the IP that was in the position prior to me. He actually came back and spent some time with me to help me get oriented to really set up, like, what are your day-to-day tasks? What are you going to do? But I was on my own.
Okay. Okay, that leads me to several more questions that I have. Um, First off, it's already unique that you got hired as a non-nurse in this role, because this is back probably late '90s, I imagine. Is that
Yeah, early
okay?
90s.
Early '90s. Okay, so yeah, before it was common at all for a non-nurse to be in the role, and not only, and you said you had the support of the doctors, which is phenomenal. I mean that's a rare thing in and of itself. So that's tremendous. It is even today extremely uncommon for a sole preventionist position to be a non-nurse. Um, so I have two questions related to this. One, obviously you had the support of leadership who hired you into the role. How was the interaction with the rest of the hospital staff having a non-nurse come around and kind of instruct them on things. Was that difficult for you? And then second part of that question, how did you gain the respect that you needed?
I would say it was difficult for me because I didn't necessarily have the self-confidence, being so brand new and not really knowing if I knew the right information to be bringing to people. So I actually did a lot of homework just so that I could feel confident um, going into certain situations or meetings. But what was difficult was if you had to interact with, like, say, a nursing leader, a nurse manager on a unit, and you were trying to get your point across about like some aseptic technique or issues around, that something might have come up around infection control. You were like, say, trying to share the infection prevention specific information without necessarily feeling like I could speak her language as far as the clinical side. And so it was a little bit intimidating, you go in and say, I think I think we might have an issue we need to talk about. I noticed, something going on in the unit. And then like, how do I approach that? So that was a difficulty for me. Again, just not being sure. And so, what I learned to do to start gaining that confidence and then maybe the trust in the clinical teams was when I was unsure, instead of pretending or going back and doing the homework on my own and really still not sure if I understood, I just started to ask people to show me. And so if it was something around aseptic task with a line or an IV, and I had never done that task. And so I just said, can you show me? If you show me the clinical side, I can probably interpret, what's clean or aseptic about this, or what we might have a concern about. And so I learned to like just partner and acknowledge that I didn't know it all. I don't know it all, but I know you have this part of the information. And so I think that really was a turning point for me when I started to say, can you show me? Because I'm not a nurse, and
Yeah.
people started to be like, oh, okay. Yeah.
Let me ask you a follow-up. And I don't get to ask this question often, so I'm very curious as to your answer. And you've obviously risen up the ladder and you've held some large positions, and we'll get into that in a second. But I'm curious what the complications are for there to be a non-nurse as a solo IP. Mm-hmm. This particular case for critical access hospitals, but just in general, there is significant hesitation, if not just they just won't allow a non-nurse in a sole preventionist role. And I've had it explained to me a couple times, not particularly clear, but I guess there's things that need to be signed off on that maybe a non-nurse can't sign off, or I don't know, but I want to kind of open it up. Are you aware of any, or could you speak to what complications there may be for to hire in a non-nurse as the sole practitioner in the facility? Like, were there some loopholes that needed to be jumped through, or did other people have to take on some responsibilities? Or do you know what the hesitations may be there?
I'm only making an assumption because I'm not sure. I've never necessarily been in a situation where I was advocating for a non-nurse as a solo IP, except for myself. And like I said, I fortunately went into a situation where they were open to that.
Right.
But what I would think are possible complications to that, or if an organization is small and they are anticipating needing to tap this person for more than infection prevention and control, because in that case, they would be able to, kind of broaden the scope of that role that might be, requiring some clinical background.
Gotcha.
And so that would be like, to me, probably the top reason why an organization may not want to hire a non-nurse. Otherwise, I mean, if it's in their contracts, depending on what type of organization they are, they may have some contractual things that also hold them to a nursing background. But I think it's probably more about these organizations that need to kind of put a couple hats on that person.
Makes sense. And that's very common in small facilities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, that's kind of what my thought was, but I always want to ask just to make sure I'm not missing anything with that regard. So, all right, back to your kind of career track here. So you operate as a sole preventionist to start with. You were kind of shadowing, asking a bunch of questions, and that's kind of how you learned the clinical piece that was necessary. You went and got certified, got involved with local APIC chapters, which helped a lot. What was your next position? How long were you in that role, and then what did you kind of move into next?
So I was infection control coordinator for 8 or 9 years.
Okay.
At that organization, and I had a young family, and I was thinking, do I want to cut back my hours? Or, I mean, being the singular IP, there was a lot on my shoulders. At least I placed a lot of responsibility on my own shoulders. Right. About the program. And so I was like, okay, I have a young family. I don't know if I want to, be the only person doing this work right now. And so at that time, I was also, very interested in, how hospitals were expanding into electronic medical records and, how we gain information that way. And so there was an opportunity for me the organization was moving into a new electronic medical record, and they were looking for clinically minded and other, various disciplines to participate in the building of that system. And so I jumped over to work in informatics, and
Interesting.
And just thought, and it was really interesting how that, that interest has followed me the rest of my career, is to understand how information comes to you and understand how you might be able to utilize it. But I moved over to informatics. I helped build some electronic medical record systems for that organization that I was with. And then from that point, after that project was complete, and I was thinking, okay, I'm still drawn to infection prevention and even like clinical micro. What do I want to do now? And I decided to go back into the laboratory part-time while my third child was very small. And so, did some infectious disease laboratory specific work, pulse field gel electrophoresis, like kind of specialty lab work.
Yeah.
And that was, again, another like kind of eye opener to like how we can utilize our diagnostics to support infection prevention. So I did that for a few years. And then the IP bug just kept coming back. Like I just want to work in infection prevention. I love that work. I was drawn to it. And so fortunately, a position was opening up in Philadelphia, and it was actually a role with the Philadelphia Department of Health to work on a CDC funded study. And it was during the time of, concerns around, kind of bioterror kind of things. And so the CDC was doing a rash algorithm study where they were looking to see how clinicians could utilize a tool to tell them when this was a very concerning rash for smallpox. Yeah. So I was able to work with some really great physicians at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, and with a great director at the Department of Health to implement that study and actually ask physicians. I sought out rashes at both hospitals And I asked clinicians to complete the algorithm to see how it worked against up against like identifying smallpox or something, some serious disease. So so that was my research. I then like fell into a research role, and I was doing research coordination based on that, and was able to do a couple other studies in that role before the money ran out and the grant money runs away, and I was already working in the children's hospital. So when that grant money was running out, they actually created a position for me to be the data coordinator for the department. So that it's kind of an evolution of things. But
yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so this was then, I mean, you were doing some studies where you're in and out of some other hospitals, but this position as a data analyst is in a different hospital than your first position in infection prevention,
yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yes.
How much different was IP in a different hospital?
Yeah. So, like I said, I was still in peds, right? Like I was in a small pediatric hospital in Wilmington, Delaware. And that hospital was definitely growing and expanding. And so the challenges of the program were growing. But then coming into my position in Philadelphia at the Children's Hospital, the main thing that was different was there was a team of 5 IPs at the time instead of just me, and just the acknowledgement that they needed that many IPs in order to really support the hospital and the expanding growth of the organization was very I don't know, kind of eye-opening to me to see that you can really expand a program, and that does take some work. You need to let leaders know what the work is like in order to gain that support for resources. But for me, that was the big difference, like having a team where we were kind of specializing in our roles as well. We had a couple IPs that were really focused on neonatal intensive care or pediatric intensive care. We had an IP who was all about ambulatory and high-level disinfection. So already kind of parsing out the roles so that we could kind of divide and conquer the work. And for me, it was data management. It was becoming much more important that we had data at our fingertips, that people could utilize it to make decisions. I also was really super fortunate to work with our informatics team there, and leader who was still at the Children's Hospital, and created our own electronic surveillance system. So there wasn't things out there that we thought were meeting our needs. So we built our own. And that's the difference, is that if you can get resources to do work like that, that was the big difference.
That's amazing. Wow, I didn't realize that you had done that. That's very neat. And at some point now, you got promoted into a management role, correct?
Yes.
So how long did that take, and how did that play out?
Oh, gosh. I was at the Children's Hospital in the data management role a few years, maybe 4 years, 3 to 4 years before there was an opportunity to move into a management role for the department.
And then was that an existing position that somebody left and there was a vacancy that you applied for? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. How, just because this is, I mean, most management positions require previous management ability or experience, which obviously causes complications for a lot of people. I imagine that was probably the case here too. How did you sell yourself for a management role? And how were you, I don't think to this point in your career you had managed people necessarily, but how did you start building that management skill set in your previous roles to kind of set yourself up to land that position?
Well, I think that one of the things that I was always sort of, if I were promoting my experiences, it was to say I didn't necessarily lead people, but I led an entire program. So I had the program, like being a lone infection prevention coordinator. I had to manage a program. And also, with that said, you have to influence how others do their work. If as an infection preventionist, you're partnering, but you're also influencing others to do work a certain way. So I think I probably highlighted that quite a bit. I also did have again, kind of forward thinking, in that we did have an infection prevention associate that reported to me, and they were like a data tech. And so I did have a bit of just, maybe one direct report. Again, something to hold up as not, I acknowledge that this would be a bigger job with more direct reports, but I do believe that I have, the basic groundwork to work towards that. The other thing that I think I've always tried to do is share my vision for where infection prevention is and where it's going. And sometimes you need to be a little bit visionary to help people see that your thoughts, you are a thought leader, or you get it, that things need to be well thought out. So just kind of sharing those other strengths that you might have that are not necessarily a skill set of leading others or at the time, but you have those others talents or skills to bring to the table.
Yeah. And tell me, and I've heard this a lot, so I'm curious on your thoughts on it. But it seems like a lot of people that move into a management role for the first time in infection prevention are surprised by, one, maybe their lack of management ability or skill set. Like they just kind of realize that's not something they've really honed in on throughout. They've been so focused on the whether it's microbiology or learning the clinical piece, that learning and setting yourself up to excel in management kind of is something that just wasn't the focus. And it's kind of surprising when you get into that role. Was that the case for you, or did you feel like, no, I mean, you were well prepared for this role and it was kind of seamless?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think everybody does have different talents when it comes to leadership. Some people it's more natural, and I'm probably one of those more natural. It feels more natural to me. Just throughout my life, things I've done, sports, I always want to be the captain,
Yeah.
or, just different clubs. I want to be the president of the club, so you kind of have some things throughout your life that indicate whether or not you have the motivation to lead. And then, for me, like if I was unsure, I always was drawn towards books or leadership kinds of trainings, just to try and like give myself a little bit of a understanding of like where my where my lack of knowledge of how to lead could be getting in my way. So I definitely did a lot of reading, various books,
Yeah.
So.
No, that's good. And so you did this. How many direct reports did you have at the time?
I was able to build the program a bit. So initially there was probably 5. I think by the time I was ready to move on, there were 10.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's a pretty significant team there. So great. Now I'm looking at your resume and there's something that jumps out. So I want to know what went through your mind, or what kind of motivated this. And if it's more personal reasons, then that's fine too. But what it sounds like, or what it looks like, is you went from manager role, significant manager role, over 10 people, then to take a staff level position, which didn't end up lasting very long. But I'm curious what caused you to take a step back at that point. Did you feel like it was necessary for future career growth, or was it you just needed work-life balance? Or I guess what went into that decision?
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. I, again, went back to that smaller children's hospital right down the road from where I live. I live in Delaware. And I did that at a time that was very personal reason. So again, feeling the leadership stresses and responsibilities can impact your family. And at the time, my mother-in-law was ill. And I had my husband, who was always close to home, could pick up the kids, all those things. And now there was this additional stressor on the family.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be closer to home. And it just so happened that that position opened up around the time when I was like, I really just want to be closer to home. I have to say, I did not leave that position for any other reason than that. I was very happy in the position. The team was great. The support from leadership was great. And I missed it terribly after I left.
That was going to be my question. Did you enjoy getting back to boots on the ground, or was it something that you just really loved the management role?
Yeah, I really loved it. And I think I'm just so drawn to it. I mean, the supervisor I had at the time, she was thinking about making a move about a year and a half into my time there. And she just said to me, Eileen, you need to be leading.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay.
Yeah. I would say, because it didn't take long. I mean, you were in that role for 9 months, and then looks like you got pushed into a management role at the local
Yes.
spot, which is awesome. Was that just a fortunate thing, just an opening happened, and then you moved into the role?
Yeah.
Great. And then, so you did that for, looks like 3 years or so, which was great. And then you, then it looks like took pretty significant promotion at that point into a system director role at a health system. Is that
Yes.
right? Okay. So talk to me about that. Were you wanting to get to the next level, pursuing new things, or how did you find a job? Because I mean, this one, was this also a local facility?
This was not. I mean, it was reasonable. It was a reasonable commute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you didn't have to relocate the family or
No,
anything, but it was
no.
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you identify? Were you pursuing system director jobs? Was this recommended to you? How did you discover this role?
So I was not at the time considering changing roles at that level. Like, maybe another manager role if it came along at a larger facility or something. But I was not actively seeking a change in position. But the infection preventionist that was working with me at the time, I had hired her, and she had come from that other organization. She had been working in the clinical lab. She went on and got her master's degree, very similar to my background, and then came to work with me. And she was recruited back when they had an infection prevention position open at that organization. And I was sorry to see her go, but I said, if this is the right thing for you, I know you love that organization, because that was the other thing. Like, she always said that she never thought she would have left that organization, except for that she wanted to work in infection prevention. And so I wished her well, and, sorry, you're doing such a great job, but, do what's best for you. And during, I think, the course of her having these interviews, she learned that the system director role was opening up, and she encouraged me to apply. And I was like, I don't think so, I don't think so. And she was like, oh no, she said, I've been telling the medical director there that I really don't want to leave my manager. like she's a really good manager. And I can tell him, if you want to, have an interview, I can tell him you're that manager that I don't want to leave, And so she strongly encouraged me to do that. And turns out it worked out for me.
Wow. No, that's amazing. So tell me the scope of that. Was it multiple hospitals? How big of a team?
Mm-hmm.
Give me an idea of what you were working with.
Yeah, so it's a 5 hospital system with a large, ambulatory network. 4 acute care hospitals, 1 acute rehab. There, like I said, it's a pretty large system, and the team though was really about the size of the team that I had in Philadelphia. So 1 to 2, maybe 3 IPs per campus, depending on the size. But so they were all campus infection preventionists that were going to be reporting to me.
Gotcha. So I think this is the first time in your career where you've been over multiple facilities, or at least multiple hospitals. How big of a change was that for you?
It's another one of those anxiety-producing experiences. Where that imposter syndrome starts to seep into your thinking.
Right.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And I can remember during the interview process saying to the VP of patient safety and quality, who I admired so much. I knew her through infection prevention world, actually. So it was Denise Murphy at the time. Lots of people in APIC know her. She has since moved on and now is probably partially retired. I don't think that she'll ever be able to retire. But she was the VP of patient safety and quality and was the hiring manager for me. And I had multiple interviews. It was very I needed to have a lot of stamina to get through the interview process. But at the final, what I was presuming to be the final interview, I was with her and the chief medical officer and the chief nurse as a final interview. And I just turned to her and said that I really thought I was ready for it. And that I had good people skills, I had good programmatic leadership skills, and that I believed in developing IPs to do well in their role, and that would be my role, is to support IPs in doing work that was important to patient safety. So I think that convinced her.
Yeah. So, okay. You obviously throughout your career, you've managed a lot of IPs. I'm sure you've sat in on a lot of interviews for IPs. I'm curious as to what do you look for when you go to hire an IP? Like, have you identified like a specific personality trait or a specific, I don't know, is there something that you can point out in a person or pick up in a person that makes you think like, okay, that person would have a great career in infection prevention, or that person's going to make it? What is it that you look for or that you see as kind of a trend in successful IPs?
Well, I think probably harkening back to my original description of myself, I certainly am, when I see an IP, whether they're like brand new to the field or, relatively new to even their professional career, when I see them be able to show up with confidence to those interviews, because that is like one of the things that I felt like I had to develop. I need to show up with confidence, and had to do a lot of homework behind the scenes to show up with that confidence. And so I anticipate, or I would expect, that the reason they're showing up to their interview that way is they prepared. And so being prepared, showing up with confidence, really needing to try and dig into like what are their people's skills, because infection preventionists are mostly in a consultant role where we're trying to influence how others do their work, and all with the focus on no harm to the patient, right? So if they can come to me and show that they have that ability, that kind of emotional intelligence, that partnership, that ability to develop relationships, of course I'm going to look at where's their background, what kind of experiences they may have had that are going to lend well to that. But I can teach them a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
I can teach them the skill set of the role, but they really need to be able to interact and influence others. So I try to get to that in the interview.
That's great. And one more question for you. If you were going to put together like your ideal infection prevention team, what do you have a preferred educational background or experiences that team would come up with? I guess what would their makeup be? I mean, would you want a team of all nurses? Would you want a team of all non-nurses? Do you want a diverse team? And if you want a diverse team, do you have kind of things penciled in that like, no, I'd really love somebody that has this background and this background because they work really well together? What would your kind of model team be if you could kind of imagine it in an ideal setting?
Yeah. Well, I've always been all for a diverse background because someone gave me a chance. And so I always have my mind open to that diverse background. I mean, I actually at one point hired a vet, someone who had a veterinary background. Um, so I am all for that diverse background. And as a matter of fact, as an infection prevention leader, I try to emphasize that, sorry, with the team, saying, when I have the team at the table in a room meeting, there are certain times when I want to emphasize that they all bring something important to the table. So if you have a very clinical background, or you have a master's in public health background, or a clinical laboratory background, or a pharmacy background, you are all bringing very important talents and skills to the table, and together we're stronger. So for me, to answer your question about what would be the ideal team, I think having people who are good with data, with stats. So maybe your MPHs are at the table. Certainly clinical individuals, nurses, respiratory therapists, certainly the laboratory individual to help us with all those kind of diagnostic things. And the one thing that I played around with in my system director role, but I never really got to do, was to see about a pharmacist, because I think having that antimicrobial stewardship piece would also be an interesting IP on the team. I mean, certainly we interact with antimicrobial stewardship pharmacists, but it would be interesting maybe to have them right there on the team.
Yeah.
And then who else would I add? Well, I mean, I think we want people also who are able to project manage, things like that. So maybe if you have the resources to have someone who's a non-IP, but can help IPs do the work through quality work or project management, that would also be somebody I would add.
Excellent. No, it's a phenomenal answer. And I thank you for that. All right. To close out, I want to kind of open the floor a little bit. I explained kind of our general audience to you. So I just want to hear what you would say to somebody that was entertaining a career in infection prevention. How would you encourage them or maybe discourage them from this field? What would you say to those folks that are looking at this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, infection prevention, just like any other role, is not necessarily for everyone. But if you're a lifelong learner, and if you love the idea of somehow being able to impact patients and the care that they receive, this is a really unique way to do that. And because it is such a broad, like you have to have knowledge of the entire health continuum of care. It's not just one little piece of how a patient's cared for. It's to be in infection prevention, you need to understand everything about the patient care, whether it's the building they're in, the water that's being fed through it, the HVAC, the way the nurses are interacting, the procedures that they're doing. So if you are a kind of person who can enjoy learning about many different things, you're gonna really be satisfied with this role. It's not to say it's not super challenging. It is super challenging, and there are days when you're super tired, and and there's also tedium, right? There's digging into surveillance, so it can be tedious at times. But overall, you learn every day. I mean, I've been doing this work for a very long time, as you mentioned, or a very long time. But I still learn every day, and if you're the kind of person that thrives on learning all the time, it's the right position for you.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Voice for Infection Prevention. We hope you found our discussions informative and insightful. Remember to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations with experts in the field, and don't forget to leave us a review to let us know what you think. For additional resources and to stay updated on the latest news in infection prevention, visit our website at voiceforip.com. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, stay safe and continue your commitment to excellence in infection prevention.